During the Harlem Renaissance, while Langston Hughes was writing, while Duke Ellington was playing, while black excellence was reshaping American culture, black doctors were still being turned away from the only hospital in Harlem. Let that land. In 1919, a black physician named Dr. Lewis T. Wright became the first black doctor ever appointed to a New York City municipal hospital. He was a Harvard Medical School graduate, a war hero who earned the Purple Heart, a man who had dedicated his life to medicine. When his appointment was announced, 4 white doctors resigned in protest. The superintendent who hired him was demoted and sent to work the gate booth at Bellevue Hospital. That is what it cost to let one black doctor through the door. And yet, Dr. Wright stayed. He fought. He healed. He spent the next 33 years at Harlem Hospital, becoming one of the most decorated physicians in American history, all while fighting every single day for the right of black doctors and black patients to be treated as equals. Black health and black excellence have always been the same fight. 100 years later, that fight is still not over. I'm Dr. Michael H. Ford, and this is a story you need to hear. Black Americans are 30% more likely to die from heart disease than white Americans. Black women die from pregnancy-related causes at more than 3 times the rate of white women. The wealth gap, the insurance gap, the access gap. These are not abstract statistics. They are our mothers, our fathers, our children, and they deserve better than what this system has given them. And this August, we are taking that fight back to Harlem. On August 13th, the Black Health Matters Harlem Week 2026 Health Summit and Expo is coming to the historic Riverside Church, the same Harlem that Dr. Wright fought to practice medicine in. Free health screenings, free giveaways, complimentary breakfast and lunch, access to doctors and real resources, real conversations about closing the gaps that are still costing us our lives. Dr. Wright fought so that we could walk through that door. Come to Riverside Church in Harlem on August 13th. Bring your friends, bring your family. It is for us, by us, completely free. Register at blackhealthmatters.com. I hope to see you there.
The standard story of the 1930s in America is that the country collapsed. Stock market crash, banks failing, bread lines, dust bowls, soup kitchens, Hoovervilles, everybody starving in black and white photographs. That version is the Great Depression that most people learned in school. But not everybody was depressed, because what you probably weren't taught is what Black America was doing during that same exact period. Because while the country was falling apart, Black America was in the middle of a renaissance. Honestly, 2 of them. People talk about the Harlem Renaissance like it was this cute little jazz moment, you know? Jazz clubs, poetry readings, white people sneaking into Harlem and then leaving before midnight. But that framing misses what actually happened. The Harlem Renaissance didn't suddenly stop when the stock market crashed in 1929. White money disappeared, the patrons disappeared. Publishing houses pulled back. But black artists kept creating anyway. They just stopped depending on white institutions to survive. In the 1930s, artist Charles Alston founded something called the 306 Workshop in Harlem. Inside that one building, you had Jacob Lawrence, Romare Bearden, Augusta Savage, Langston Hughes, and other black artists working together and building. They were building community in the middle of the Great Depression. While the rest of the country was talking about collapse, black artists were building infrastructure. Then Roosevelt's WPA funding started funding artists through the Federal Art Project. And black artists used that funding to build the Harlem Community Arts Center in 1937. That center became a pipeline, a training ground of sorts. So no, the Harlem Renaissance didn't die in 1929, it adapted. Which honestly feels very Black American coded, historically. Anyway. Now, here's the part almost nobody gets taught. And it's fun, so buckle in. While America was in an economic freefall, Mexico was in the middle of its own artistic explosion. Public murals, political art, national identity being rebuilt through culture. Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, David Alfaro Siqueiros. And Black Americans started going there. Repeatedly. Langston Hughes traveled to Mexico multiple times in the 1930s. Elizabeth Catlett moved there permanently in the 1940s, worked alongside Mexican artists, joined a political printmaking collective, and eventually became one of the most respected artists in Mexico. And honestly, this part says a lot. While American galleries were sidelining black artists, right, Mexico was treating many of them like collaborators, like their work mattered, like they belonged in the conversation. And for a lot of Black American artists, that mattered deeply. Because imagine growing up in a country that constantly debated whether your humanity even counts, then walking into another country and being treated like an intellectual equal. That changes people. And meanwhile, back in the United States, Black America was still creating culture at an insane level. Sister Rosetta Tharpe was laying the groundwork for rock and roll with an electric guitar in church. Billie Holiday recorded Strange Fruit in 1939. Ella Fitzgerald won amateur night at the Apollo at just 17 years old. Duke Ellington was making some of the most important music of his career. Louis Armstrong was transforming jazz. Zora Neale Hurston published Their Eyes Were Watching God in 1937. The Negro Motorist Green Book launched in 1936 and started building survival infrastructure for Black travelers across America. A. Philip Randolph organized the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters into the first major successful Black labor union. Bessie Stringfield was riding a motorcycle across the country alone during Jim Crow. Do you understand how wild this period actually was? Black America was not sitting around waiting for the Depression to end. Black America was building the cultural foundation of modern America while the country was distracted. And honestly, I think this tells you something very important about history. When countries fall apart, the people hit the hardest are usually the people who had the most faith in the system working for them in the first place. Black Americans already knew the system could collapse. And for a lot of us, it already had. So while mainstream America was mourning the death of stability, Black America kept building, kept creating, kept imagining, kept making culture powerful enough to survive the collapse around it. And that's the part history struggles to tell honestly, because the official story about the 1930s is white American loss. But another story was happening at the exact same time. A story where Black artists, writers, musicians, labor organizers, and travelers were building entire cultural worlds during one of the hardest economic periods in American history. And once you realize that, the Great Depression stops looking like one universal American experience and starts looking like two completely different countries living through the same decade.
Welcome back to the Freedom Room, where we uncover the stories that shape America and influence the world. Today, we are exploring the truth about the Harlem Renaissance and how it changed the world. During the 1920s and the 1930s, a powerful cultural movement emerged in Harlem, New York, transforming literature, music, art, politics, and the way Blacks identify or Black identity was understood around the globe. But the Harlem Renaissance was more than a period of creativity. It was a response to decades of racial discrimination, inequality, and a search for dignity and recognition. It was a time when Black writers, Black musicians, Black artists, and thinkers declared that their voices could not be ignored. How did a neighborhood in New York become the center of a worldwide cultural revolution? Why did this movement become one of the most important movements in American history? And why does its influence continue to be felt in 2026? Stay with us as we uncover the powerful stories behind the Harlem Renaissance. But first, let's watch some clips together, and when we return, we'll explore how the movement changed America, or how the movement shaped America and the world today. Thank you. This is the Freedom Room. Stay, watch to the end, and please subscribe.
While they were having their Great Depression, we were having our Renaissance, the Harlem Renaissance. Those two timelines ran concurrent at the same time. Not only that, though. So you know how, in America, in history, we were never really given anything. We were never given anything. And if we did get something of our own, they would take it from us, or they would find a way to destroy it. So during the Great... During the Great Depression, white people had gold, like gold necklaces, gold rings, gold coins, whatever, right? And that was kind of like their wealth, because it accrued wealth over time and value over time. The government forced all them people to give them their gold. The government stole everybody's gold. Said they created an executive order, said give us your gold so that we can avoid gold hoarding and that it could back the reserves so that the Great Depression that we're currently in doesn't last as long. Black people didn't have gold. We didn't have gold. So during this Great Depression, not only were they taking houses, they was taking gold. Neither one of these things affected the Black community as much as it affected the other communities. Because we didn't have shit. What do you mean? the funny part about this is, after the white people gave them their gold, say you had like a $5,000 gold certificate. By the time you gave it to the government, that next day, that gold certificate was now worth $10,000, and you not seeing a cent of it because they only gave you $5,000 cash. That's it. That's it. The government robbed these niggas. And then imagine being a white person. Imagine being a white person. You look around at your fellow white counterparts, and y'all all broke. And then y'all look across the street, and black people up there, they created the chitlin circuits, the lecture circuits. They over there educating each other, innovating, creating, inventing shit. They happy to the motherfucker. I mean, it makes sense why they would create something like the Zoot Suit riots. Or they start fucking with us for no fucking reason. It would make so much sense why they would just literally start fucking with us. I'm not saying I agree, but I get why they some fucking haters. Like, imagine that. Imagine that. So to the person that actually triggered this topic, because I got a DM. Yes, during the Great Depression, we were creating. This is when we got our footing as a community, because it was the early 20s, early 30s. We had only just got free 1860s, free in the 1860s. So you already know, like, a lot of us, we were uneducated, we were poor. It's not like they took the chains off and gave us any type of help. We had to figure it out on our own. So we only a generation, 2 generations into like the free black community. So of course we didn't have much. So during the Great Depression, we was already living in our Great Depression for like 400 years. So it didn't really affect us as much. Now granted, there was a free black population. There was the bourgeois. So there was a part of the black community that was affected by the Great Depression. But as for like the majority of us, that's why it was so easy for us to take that pain and turn it into dances, into songs, into hymns, quilts, poems, fucking books, everything you could think of. Like the Harlem Renaissance is just so beautiful because it's just pure black creation. Everything. We created everything. Everything. But yeah, it did run concurrent. So at the same time that white people was over here struggling, black people was innovating. We took that nothing and made everything out of it. I love us. I'll always say this. I fucking love us. Okay? So yeah, thought I'd give y'all that lesson. Did you know this?
What if I told you the Harlem Renaissance wasn't just about jazz and poetry? It was about survival, identity, and health. I'm Dr. Michael H. Ford, and I'm standing here in Harlem where a movement began that would change the way the world saw black life. This is a story you need to hear. In the early 1900s, thousands of black families fled the South. They were escaping Jim Crow, racial terror, and poverty, searching for safety and opportunity. This migration brought nearly 175,000 black men, women, and children to Harlem by the 1920s. Here on the streets of Upper Manhattan, they built something extraordinary, the Harlem Renaissance. It wasn't called that at the time. Back then, it was known as the New Negro Movement, a declaration that black identity would no longer be defined by stereotypes or silence. Harlem became the beating heart of black America, art, music, politics, literature, and culture all converging in one place. Langston Hughes turned jazz into poetry. Nora Neale Hurston collected stories that preserved the wisdom of black folk culture. Duke Ellington's orchestra filled the Cotton Club with sounds so powerful they redefined American music. And behind the lights and the glamour, Harlem became a laboratory of black self-expression, a way of affirming health, dignity, and humanity in a world that denied them daily. But the Renaissance wasn't just about art, it was about survival. Harlem's crowded apartments and poor sanitation led to high rates of tuberculosis, infant mortality, and chronic disease. At one point in the 1920s, black babies in Harlem died at twice the rate of white babies downtown. That reality fueled the urgency of the movement. Creative expression became a form of medicine, a way to heal minds and spirits while communities fought for healthier lives. Photography by James Van Der Zee captured not poverty but pride. Families in their finest clothes, dignified, radiant, refusing to be defined by struggle. Activists like W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey used Harlem as their headquarters to rally for civil rights and black economic independence. And through art, song, and scholarship, Harlem insisted black life was not a problem to be solved, but a culture to be celebrated. Yet by the 1930s, the Great Depression struck hard. Jobs disappeared, poverty deepened, and health disparities grew. Still, the legacy of the Harlem Renaissance endured. It laid the foundation for the civil rights movement, inspired Pan-African pride, and shifted global perceptions of black identity. Today, when we talk about black health, Harlem reminds us it is not just about hospitals or clinics. It's about culture, dignity, and the conditions that allow communities to thrive. The Harlem Renaissance proved that health is not only physical, it's spiritual, it's intellectual, and it's cultural. This wasn't just a renaissance, it was resistance, it was healing, and it was the blueprint for every fight for equity that came after.
You're up in Harlem. How is it?
It's fantastic. The nicest people. They tell me to have a blessed day every day. I live at 139,000th and Malcolm X. And people assume, well, my wife is a black woman, so I'm her plus one. So they assume that my neighborhood is gentrified, but I think they're thinking further down towards the park. There's a Whole Foods at 120th and Malcolm Gladwell.
Okay.
That's
a little bit more gentrified.
Yes,
sure,
and then at 110th, it's actually Malcolm in the middle.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
The clips you just watched reveal that the Harlem Renaissance was not simply an artistic movement. It was a declaration of identity. It was a declaration of pride and renaissance or resistance. Beginning in the early 20th century, especially during the 1920s, Harlem became a destination of thousands of Black Americans who moved north during the Great Migration in search of better opportunities. This growing community created a space where creativity could flourish. Writers such as Langston Hughes used poetry to express the everyday experience, the struggles, the dreams, and the hopes of Black Americans. Zora Neale Hurston preserved Black culture and traditions through her literature, her research, and many other aspects. In music, legends like Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong helped transform jazz into a global art form. Artists, photographers, and intellectuals challenged negativity, stereotypes, and showed the world a richer picture of Black life and creativity. The movement also influenced political thought, encouraging ideas of racial pride, self-determination, and the fight for equality. But the Harlem Renaissance was not without challenges. Many Black artists still face discrimination, economic struggles, and a society that often celebrated their creativity while denying them equal rights. So let me ask you these questions. Why do you think the art became such a powerful tool for a community fighting for recognition and equality? Do you believe music, literature, and culture can change society as much as politics can? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Continue watching more clips, and when we return, we'll return with our final commentary. Stay tuned to the Freedom Room and watch to the end. We'll discuss the lasting impact of the Harlem Renaissance in America today that is felt right now in 2026. Stay tuned and watch to the end.
I just put in my final grade, so let's talk about the Harlem Renaissance, what it is, and some stellar texts that exemplify its many complexities. To begin with, the Harlem Renaissance originates with the Great Migration, or the period of American history beginning roughly in 1910, where a large number of African Americans leave the American South for these industrial hubs in the Midwest and the Northeast, like Chicago, Detroit, and New York City. And the reason for the Great Migration, while they include being fed up with the predatory practices of sharecropping, a decline in agriculture after the boll weevil infestation, and just the very much alive legacies of the Confederacy post-Civil War. But as these populations move north, we see a lot of redlining, or the practice that would exclude African Americans from certain districts or neighborhoods, so they'd often be forced into their own areas. But it's from these areas that we see a surge in artistic production, such as Chicago's Bronzeville or, Harlem. Now, this generation of people involved in the Great Migration, it's important to remember that they are only 1 or 2 generations removed from American slavery. But they're also firsthand witnesses to what came after. So namely, during the Reconstruction era, there was a brief period where African Americans across the South mobilized under new rights to seek political representation. And this period was pretty optimistic until white supremacy freaked out and sought the removal of Black political power by any means necessary. Look no further than the Wilmington Massacre and Coup, a historical event that isn't talked about that much for reasons both obvious and depressing. This is to say that this generation of people taking part in the Great Migration have seen what comes from efforts to cater to or mollify systems of power that are fundamentally managed by white supremacy. So they decide to do something radically new. They're going to produce a culture of art that is not contingent upon the approval or need of the white gaze or the participation of white audiences. In making art that does not meet the expectations of a white audience, it's a celebration of Black identity, but also a philosophical gesture that says we needn't concede in our pursuits of liberty. So we see in the 1920s a rise of Black art unlike any before, art that rejects certain aesthetic mandates, fusing the music of jazz with poetry, for instance. Now, when learning about literary movements, I like to start with texts that precede the movement, then the text emblematic of the movement, and finally texts that evolve from the movement. This gives a really rich, more dimensional understanding of its scope and importance. So beginning with what preceded it, probably best to start with the 18th century work of Phillis Wheatley, largely recognized as the first African-American poet. And there's a lot to enjoy about Wheatley, but she became a kind of figurehead for this sort of art rejected by the Harlem Renaissance or challenged by it, namely Black art that is celebrated because it takes on the conventions of traditionally white aesthetic features. In the case of Phillis Wheatley, this kind of neoclassical prosody. So she's a good example of what sets the stage. And you got to read W.E.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folks. In some ways, a pretty visible precursor to the Harlem Renaissance, definitely a huge influence, and just an amazing piece of rhetoric overall. But I'm choosing it because down the line, it also represents a bifurcation of thought in the Harlem Renaissance, as Du Bois's vision of Black art is inseparable from a kind of moral imperative that later authors will kind of take issue with. As for the Harlem Renaissance itself, it's nearly impossible to pick just a few, but for the sake of the exercise, got to start with Alain Locke's 1925 anthology, The New Negro, largely seen as the book that kind of kicks everything off, and wherein we see a collection of writing and poetry that answers that call for art by Black artists and for Black audiences. If you read nothing else from this list, this is the one to read. Then let's go Cain by Jean Toomer. I just love this novel, or a story collection, depending on who you ask. It's a really cool example of how the Harlem Renaissance emerges from some of those liberatory principles of literary modernism, but how it also adds a kind of social consciousness to it. Really great novel or story collection. And finally, gotta go, Their Eyes Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Hurston's just a unique figure in the Harlem Renaissance, and you can see why in this novel. For one, she's unafraid of telling the stories of her home place in the American South, a move that wasn't always popular amongst her New York contemporaries. And for another, she's pretty invested in depicting not just Black identity, but specifically Black female identity, another move that wasn't all that popular among some of her peers. You can check out the video I did about her feud with Richard Wright if you want more on that. The Renaissance starts coming to an end with the economic destabilization of the Great Depression, but its imprint, impact, and legacy remain. A text that kind of perfectly exemplifies how the Harlem Renaissance evolved onward is James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. Baldwin is the heir apparent of the Harlem Renaissance, given his proximity to the movement when he was younger, but his work will expand the focus on identity to account for things like gender and sexuality. Just a really great book. On the more cynical side of things, we have Ishmael Reed's Mumbo Jumbo that represents how inheritors to the Harlem Renaissance meet with postmodernism later in the 20th century. So it's a wild book. It's satirical, retrospective on the Harlem Renaissance itself. And Reed is a complicated figure to say the least, but it's such an excellent insight into how that next generation of writers viewed the value and limitations of those earlier movements, as well as how they view the ongoing project of Black advancement and Black excellence. And finally, something you could read right now, Richard Reeves's relatively recent poem, Future from Beyond the Voice of God. I love teaching this poem. And in my reading of this poem, it's a celebration of Black excellence that's come before and how it's evolved into now. And it's into the meter of Fuck Up Some Commas by Future. So that's awesome.
Gladys Bentley was a gender-bending, cross-dressing lesbian performer of the Harlem Renaissance. And contrary to popular belief, there were many flamboyant, unapologetic gay lesbian figures of the Renaissance movement that we never really talk about. And Gladys Bentley, the openly lesbian, cross-dressing, pianist, blues singer, was one of them. I'm going to read y'all this little excerpt from this article I was reading about her. Tell me it don't make y'all think about this smooth ass stud with a powerful voice that got some male drag queens singing behind her. And remember, this is 1930. In 1934, A Midtown Manhattan nightclub called King's Terrace was padlocked by the police after an observer complained that the dirty songs was performed there. The After Theater Club near Broadway was where a trope of liberally painted male recipients with effeminate voices and gestures performed behind entertainer Gladys Bentley, who was no less provocative for early 20th century America. Picture it, performing in a signature white top hat, tuxedo and tails, Bentley sang raunchy songs laced with double entendres that thrilled and scandalized her audiences. I'm sorry, y'all, I'm petty as hell, because why do I picture her sounding like this? Now, her story really crazy, though. This is what I read. In an interview with Ebony magazine, Bentley stated, "It seems I was born different. At least I always thought I was." From an early age, Bentley defied gender normative behaviors and femininity. She did not match the early 20th century beauty idea of being slender, boyish, and preferred to wear her brother's suits instead of dresses and blouses. The article goes on to say, as a result of the lack of her gender conformity, she was teased by her classmates and often ostracized by her family and peers. Bentley recalled dreaming and being infatuated with her primary school female teachers, but did not understand those feelings until later in her life. It says Bentley's behavior was seen as abnormal and unladylike, which led to her family sending her to doctors to fix Bentley's desires. Later, psychiatrists would coin Bentley's non-heteronormative behavior as extreme social maladjustments. Due to her inability to feel comfortable and her family's inability to accept her as she was, Bentley ran away from home at the age of 16 and began her life in New York City, and the rest is history. This woman is Black history, man. It says that Bentley had a great talent for playing the piano, being a singer, and being an entertainer. She said her performances was comical, sweet, risque, and a bit raunchy. Now, I'm going to read this word from this book about genderqueer performances during the Harlem Renaissance. These ain't my words now. This is all. Shout out to Ellen McBreen. In her music, she called out men and openly sang about sexual relationships, what could be seen as risque behavior at that time. Even more, she often sang about sissies and bulldoggers through innuendo and more literally about her female lovers she flirted with women in her audience. Sadly, though, when Prohibition times rolled in and the little speakeasy clubs went on a decline, she was forced to relocate to Southern California. And as time changed, you feel me, the state government, the federal government got more stringent on particular performances. Miss Bentley had to carry around a permit that allowed for her to perform in men's clothing. She was frequently harassed for wearing men's clothing, and she even claimed at one point in time to be married to a white woman in Atlantic City. But this where the story get a little sad, though. During McCarthyism, that whole era of the Red Scare, she started wearing dresses and married a man within 5 months of meeting him. She lived many lives, apparently. Bentley also studied to be a minister, claiming to be cured by taking female hormones. In an effort to describe her supposed cure for homosexuality, she wrote an essay called "I Am a Woman Again." For Ebony magazine, she even stated that she had undergone an operation which helped change her life again. In 2019, New York Times recognized Bentley as Harlem's most famous lesbian. Education is elevation. I'll see y'all later.
Now that you have seen the bigger picture, one thing is clear. The Harlem Renaissance changed far more than American culture. It changed how the world viewed Black creativity. It changed how the world viewed Black intelligence and how identity could be changed. It opened doors for future generations of writers, future generation of musicians, filmmakers, activists, and leaders. The idea born during the period influenced later movements, including the civil rights movement, by inspiring people who demanded respect, equality, and representation. The music created during the era helped shape modern genres such as jazz, blues, popular music worldwide. The literature and the arts produced in Harlem continue to be studied because they capture the dreams and the struggles of people determined to define themselves. Even in 2026, the Harlem Renaissance remains a reminder that culture can change injustice, Culture can inspire changes, and culture can connect people across generations. The question for you is, do you think the Harlem Renaissance was mainly a cultural revolution? Was it a political movement, or both? Share your answers in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please support the Freedom Room by subscribing, by liking, and by sharing to your family and friends, and by turning on the notification bell so you won't miss out on our next post. This is the Freedom Room. Thank you for watching to the end, and we'll see you in the next video.